Are you looking to sell your property without all the usual headaches associated with traditional property sales? Maybe you're looking for a straightforward, hassle-free, quick sale. We've got you covered at G67 Home Buyers. Ditch the stress of endless viewings, the waiting game with property chains and the buyers missing deadlines. No matter the condition or location of your property, we're ready to buy, and guess what? We'll give you an instant cash offer, no traditional hoops to jump through. We get it. Sometimes you just need to sell fast, and we're here to make that happen. We'll often be able to buy in just a few days. You no longer need to worry about the sale falling through after weeks or months. We have buyers ready now. We handle everything for you, even paying your legal fees, and there is no hidden fees or estate agent commissions to pay. Just a smooth, easy sale with us by your side, helping you every step of the way. I am David Smith, and I will personally help you find a hassle-free solution to selling your property fast, beginning with a free, no obligation cash offer for your property. Remember, I am here to help, so get in touch in the link below and let's chat.
Welcome to Social Sessions. I'm very excited to introduce Neil MacKay, a voice that echoes with the weight of truth, the resonance of integrity and the power to ignite change. He is a seasoned journalist whose pen has pierced the veil of secrecy, exposing the raw realities that lie beneath. With each word he writes, Neil dives deeper into the complexities of our world, unearthing stories that challenge the status quo and demand attention. From the corridors of power to the streets where injustice festers, Neil's fearless pursuit of truth has earned him a reputation as one of Scotland's most influential voices in journalism. How are you doing, Neil?
I'm grand, Sean. It's good to see you. Thanks for asking me on.
It's been a while, obviously, in progress. We've been trying to get this for a wee while, do you know what I mean? I know you're a busy man.
Yeah, sorry about that. Here at last.
So what I'll do is I'll just take you back to your own childhood, Neil, just kind of your own wee history.
Okay, so well, I grew up in Northern Ireland. I was born in London. I'm from an Irish family. My mum and dad were in Ireland. Were from Ireland, but in London at the time, and they came back. They decided to come back to Northern Ireland just as the Troubles were starting. So I was born in 1970, and I think they came back like the tail end of 1970, just as it was getting kind of really brutal. So I'm from a working class background. I grew up in a pretty rough town in the north called Antrim, in a pretty rough housing estate there. But I was a bright kid. I went to one of Northern Ireland's best schools. It's a grammar school, which sometimes folk in Scotland don't really get the hang of. Grammar schools in Northern Ireland, you don't pay to go to them. You have to pass exams to get into them. So my ticket to getting out of all that was passing exams and getting into a really good grammar school. But it was kind of weird. I was like living in a really, really rough housing estate. So by day, I was going to school and studying Latin, and then by night I'm coming home to this flipping concrete jungle. So it was a kind of weird sort of double existence that I lived. And then, I was off to university, and that was me away from my kind of crazy family and sort of that rough and tumble upbringing I had. And then I, kind of thought about, maybe flirted with the idea of becoming an actor for a while, but it was journalism got a hold of me. And I started out as a young reporter in Belfast in the very early 90s. 91 was when I started. So Troubles were still on, and I, cut my teeth covering all that kind of horror show stuff.
Obviously, growing up in that kind of the Troubles, we're obviously kind of we see it as a Celtic Rangers thing over here. Do you know what I mean? And you know that yourself. But what was it actually like, kind of growing up with that, and basically like a war zone, really?
Well, you see, I have a very particular attitude, even to the word "the Troubles." Now, I'm not pulling you up for it by any stretch of imagination, because everyone in Britain uses it, and I've used it myself in the past. But I think that the Troubles is a terrible, awful. It's a euphemism. This is a civil war. It's an ethno-nationalist civil war. There was thousands and 3,500, 4,000 people died throughout the Troubles, in some of the most brutal murders. There were incendiary bombings in hotels at Christmas time, and people were burned alive. There were murder gangs torturing innocent Catholics in front of bars full of baying mobs. It was monstrous. It had a profound effect on me. I was brought up in a family which was mixed. I always find it very unusual that we use the word mixed in the 21st century as if it's somehow unusual that a Protestant would marry a Catholic. But half of my family's Protestant, the other half's Catholic, and that division also means, particularly if you go back a generation, one side of my family is hardline loyalist and one side is hardline Republican. So, on one side of my family, I have people who were in the IRA in the 1920s, and the other side there was people who were picked up a gun to kind of keep Northern Ireland British in the 1920s.
Aye.
So I'm from a very distinctly uh, uh, um, schizophrenic background when it comes to the conflict there. Personally, you know, I have no truck with religion. I'm an atheist, and I was brought up as such. I was never indoctrinated in either side. My mum and dad were crazy, but they weren't that crazy. They kept me away from bigotry and indoctrination. I would broadly identify with, I believe in a united Ireland. I would like to see Ireland united, but I've no truck with anything that's anti-democratic. If Northern Ireland's ever to be united, it has to be a peaceful agreement by the people of Northern Ireland. And I've actually never been so happy to see. Actually, I was watching a program the other night. It was a cookery show. Rick Steen was in Belfast, scooting about all the parts of Belfast that I used to go around, and I was actually, I can be a bit soppy and sentimental, but it really actually made me feel a bit tearful because it just looks so happy, and I know Northern Ireland's still plagued with a lot of troubles, but it was lovely. It is lovely to see the peace bedding in now, and
Aye.
it's really really lovely. But yeah, the troubles did have a profound effect on me. I mean, I was really badly assaulted by a loyalist gang when I was a teenager. Hospitalized, was basically an attempted murder.
Wow.
And yeah, there was friends who ended up.
Was that due, sorry, to your religion and stuff, or just where you stayed, Neil, or?
I mean, I was with a bunch of a lot of my friends were Catholic. I just happened to be with a bunch of Catholic mates, and we were walking through the wrong area at the wrong time. And I think someone overheard one of their names. It's very easy to identify people as whatever religion they are by their name in Northern Ireland, and I think maybe someone's name was mentioned, and a bunch of gangsters tried to put us 6 foot under, and thankfully I woke up in hospital, and rather than in a morgue. But I've had death threats as a journalist because of my coverage. I've been kidnapped. Well, as a reporter, I came over to Scotland to get away from all that stuff.
Aye.
I was going to have children, raise me and my wife. She's from the north as well. We were going to have kids. We came over to Scotland because we wanted to settle down and raise our kids in a functioning society, because the war was still on, obviously. And but I continued my reporting. In fact, my reporting escalated because it went much more intensely into the background of why the war was happening, rather than just when I was in Northern Ireland, I was just covering shootings and bombings as events. But at the remove in Scotland, and as I progressed through my career and became slightly more sophisticated in terms of investigative journalism, I was delving into what was actually going on and why it was going on, particularly the relationship between the British government and British Army and murder gangs and terror organizations. But at one point I was put through a mock execution by a loyalist gunman. Had a pretty profound effect on me. I was diagnosed with PTSD linked to those kind of violent incidences that I experienced, a handful of years ago. So yeah, it's it could be trying and difficult.
Oh, it's definitely a colourful background, Neil, and it's a shame that's what's happened to you, and obviously the effects, as you spoke about PTSD, and I'm pretty sure kind of a lot of people in Ireland would resonate with that kind of PTSD background. So, see, when you were obviously covering that kind of story, I know you kind of spoke about the kind of MI5 and the kind of spies and stuff like that. So, how did you kind of come about that story?
Okay, well, there's a very, very famous journalist from the 90s, who began his career in the 1970s, called Martin Dillon. He's a Northern Irish journalist, and he began to, in the 70s, to chip away at the relationship between the British government and particularly loyalist murder gangs. And journalists have been exploring this for years. And as I was growing up, when I became, in my late teens, and you started to see, I mean, there was events would happen. For example, a young Catholic guy would be killed, and by a loyalist terror gang, and the loyalist terror gang would say he was a member of the IRA, and then the family would come out and say he was not in the IRA at all. And you're starting to think, well, why are they being blamed? Why is this young man being tarnished with this claim that he was in the IRA? And we subsequently know that oftentimes that members of British intelligence were actually working hand in glove with loyalist terror organizations like the UDA and the UVF, and in some places passing intelligence to them to help target individuals. Oftentimes, though, that targeting was wrong, was faulty intelligence, and some innocent individuals got caught up in this horror and died. So, and also, it was clear to me as I got older that you cannot run an intelligence war and a counter-insurgency operations on the scale that was happening in Northern Ireland without infiltrating terror organizations. And because of the contacts I had across both terror groups and also in the security forces, it was common knowledge that this stuff was going on. The thing is, what was actually going on? People knew it was happening, but what was actually happening? So I spent like 20 years trying to put some flesh in the bones of 15 years trying to put some flesh in the bones of that. And my work established that there was a unit within inside the British Army called the Force Research Unit. It was the agent handling wing of British military intelligence. Its job was to recruit agents in both the IRA and the UVF to recruit. So let's imagine that I'm an intelligence officer here, and you're a target in a terror group. Say you're a gunman in the IRA, right? If I turn you as my agent for whatever reason, sometimes I will blackmail you, sometimes it's money, sometimes you want revenge, sometimes a whole plethora of different motives on both sides. Once I turn you, you have to continue working as a terrorist, right? Because if you don't continue working as a terrorist, which means bombing and shooting, first of all, you're of zero interest to me anymore, because I want you to pass me intelligence from inside the target organization. And that means you have to continue carrying out acts of terror, which means I know as your handler. Now, and I had intelligence officers, multiple intelligence officers, tell me that, first of all, that they knew that their agents were, carrying out acts of terror and murders. And secondly, sometimes there was collaboration. So, for example, there was there was a guy called Brian Nelson who was the chief intelligence officer for a loyalist terror group, and he was handled by officers inside the Force Research Unit, and they were helping him with what was called montages. It's intelligence files of like names, addresses, pictures, and so forth. They were helping him with his targeting. Now, the thinking within the Force Research Unit was purely utilitarian, completely amoral. They would say that they were targeting active terrorists who they couldn't get their hands on, and they would also make this sort of argument that they saved more lives than they lost, which I just think is a kind of nightmarish attitude to humanity. But also, these people were handling as the kind of great white whale, if you want, that every journalist wanted to get their hands on. And the story that I chased down was an agent who was a double agent inside the IRA, whose code name was Steakknife. Steakknife, we knew, was right at the very heart of the IRA, right at the top of the IRA. And he had been turned by British military intelligence. And, he could have taken the lives of anywhere between 25 to 100 people. I eventually named him in the early 2000s as a guy called Freddie Scappaticci. Now, he was the head of an organization within the IRA, a wing of the IRA called the Internal Security Unit. And that's also had the nickname the Nutting Squad, because
I've heard of them.
Shoot you in the head.
Aye.
Because it was there to purge traitors within the IRA. So the internal security unit, if you joined the IRA, it would vet you, it would security vet you. If you were, if you were rumbled as a tout, an informer, they would subject you to interrogation and execution. And so it's the kind of IRA's police force, if you like,
Aye.
an intelligence service. And Scappaticci was at the very head of the internal security unit. So he was working for British military intelligence. I mean, I named him in 2003 to a story that went like global, went around the world and back again.
Aye.
And before you could sneeze, it was a huge story because it showed that the IRA was penetrated, because the UVF the UVF having double agents within it who were working for the British, could be seen from within loyalism as, well, we're working for the same team, right? We're there to keep out the IRA. But the IRA working for the British, an IRA officer, volunteer, whatever you want to call it, gunman, killer, monster, whatever, they're all on both sides equally depraved. For someone in the IRA of that rank to be working as an informer for Britain showed that the IRA was actually a plaything of the British state. Like, there was an intelligence officer who said to me that the thinking, if you want to understand what the Force Research Unit was doing in British military intelligence in terms of handling agents inside both the IRA and the UVF, imagine that the IRA and the UVF are playing chess in a room. British military intelligence walks in, turns off the light, moves all the pieces to endgame, switches back the light back on, and that's the peace process. So
Aye.
that was how. So, for example, I interviewed the handler, the British Army officer who handled Steakknife. That was how I was able to name him eventually.
Sorry, what was that? See, when you look at it, Neil, because obviously it's going to be hard for any kind of viewer to look at that and say that's the way things were operating. It's hard for people to believe, right? And obviously, and people know that's true. But what would make anybody think that they would be doing anything different in this modern day and age then, with just say Palestine or things like that? Why would like Mossad and things? Why would it be any different, if that makes sense?
Well, one of the things I think it's important to know is that the tactics of the Force Research Unit were actually developed in Kenya during what's called the Mau Mau uprising. There was there's an officer, a high-ranking officer called Frank Kitson, who developed the tactics for low-level counterinsurgency. Those tactics for low-level counterinsurgency were imported into Northern Ireland in the 1970s and 80s by a Scottish soldier called Brigadier Gordon Kerr, who was at one point the British military attaché to Beijing. I've tried to track him down. If Mr. Kerr is listening, I've always wanted to interview you, Mr. Kerr, to put a lot of questions to you. So, you can contact me via Sean.
Via social sessions.
He incorporated because basically Kitson's teachings were handed down to Kerr. Kerr brought them to Northern Ireland. Kerr was the head of the Force Research Unit. The officers who worked under Kerr in the Force Research Unit would subsequently go on to build British intelligence operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So
wow,
that's clear, right? It's like granddaddy does something, daddy does it, and now son's doing it. But to go back to that point that I was trying to make about the handler of Steakknife's handler, who I interviewed in order to know that the material that we were running was accurate, was I spoke to this individual, and he said to me, that it was purely a numbers game, that Steakknife, Freddie Scappaticci, saved more lives than he cost, and that was broadly the decision. So it's those kind of almost human life on an accountant, on a profit and loss sheet. So yeah, my thing here, the key issue for me is that this strikes to the heart of the nature of British democracy, because of British democracy, because don't forget Northern Ireland is British, right? I'm from Northern Ireland. I hold a British passport, as do all my fellow folk from Northern Ireland. If this kind of stuff, and don't forget Margaret Thatcher once referred to Northern Ireland as British as Finchley. So Northern Ireland is Britain. This stuff could equally have been happening in Glasgow, but it wouldn't have happened in Glasgow or Cardiff, because Northern Ireland has always been seen as different. So we've got that. We need to understand that Northern Ireland is treated as a different entity when it comes to what happens within British democracy. But secondly, and more troubling, I've always wondered, why are people not outraged that this is happening within the British state? Because if it was happening in Glasgow or Cardiff or London, people would be outraged. If the Metropolitan
Hmm.
Police or the British Army were using agents of the state to murder,
Hmm.
there would be outrage. Governments would fall, people would go to
Definitely.
prison. But it's Northern Ireland, so it's silent. But that silence doesn't take away from the fact that this is a gross indictment of British democracy. I think it proves that, well, British democracy is hard to respect, which I would dearly like to respect all democracies because I'm a Democrat, but it's hard to
Hmm.
respect when a democracy treats its own citizens in such a way and behaves in such a way.
No, it makes so much sense, Neil, and I think what you say, obviously being in Glasgow and stuff like that, there would be outrage. And Ireland has always kind of been seen as different. You're right. So, what do you think the peace process and stuff like that? Obviously, everybody's kind of great that, like, really happy that happened. But do you think that people should be going back and looking at the stuff that you're talking about?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Um, the current Troubles Legacy Bill, legacy law, which is basically no one is going to be prosecuted um, from events in the past. It just means that there's no justice done. If this was a South African style Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people came forward and spoke openly, that they admitted, I did this, I did these terrible things, and in return for that honesty, there's an amnesty handed down. But that's not what's happening. It's just no prosecutions. Now,
Hmm.
nobody likes that in Northern Ireland. It was one of the few things that unites everybody across Northern Ireland. Everyone hates it because um, nobody's going to see justice. And fundamentally, it's there. I believe, this is opinion, not fact, because this is impossible to prove. But I think I'm allowed to speculate on some points of
Hmm.
opinion that this is plays to a very plays to the Conservative Party's constituency of protecting veterans from prosecution, which I think is pretty shabby.
No, it's at the end of the day, murder's murder, and people go to jail for a long, long time for murder. And if what you're saying can be proved or it can be looked into, essentially the state surely must be held accountable for murders.
Well, I mean, we know it's true because we had what's called Operation Cova, which was an operation um, led by a man called John Boucher, who's the chief constable from England, who is now chief constable in Northern Ireland. He led Operation Boucher, which was looking into the crimes of Freddie Scappaticci, the man who I named a Steakknife. It was a long running
Steakknife.
operation going over years. This is proved. It's
Hmm.
like we cannot have any debate about the fact that these things happened. In fact, it's very important that Operation Canova by Boucher happens because it's confirmation that at least one arm of the state, the police, is taking this seriously. Am I optimistic it will come to anything? Not really. I mean, I think once the British government made Gordon Kerr, who was the head of the FRU, its military attaché to Beijing, that it was quite clear that he was being promoted for his work in Northern Ireland, not not in any way brought to task. And I was told by multiple sources within British intelligence that the reports that were being put together by the FRU were going all the way to Whitehall and Downing Street. That these reports were landing on the desk of um, Margaret Thatcher in the 80s. So,
Wow.
did I read those reports and see exactly what was in them? No. So, and I doubt they very much spell out, yes, we have an agent, he's murdering people and he's telling us this. But the intelligence that came from those agents was landing on the desk of politicians and civil servants. So, the trio, it goes all the way to the top. This is not a rogue outfit. The FRU was not a rogue operation operating out
No.
the chain of command, both militarily and politically.
Because like in the IRA, you had kind of the real IRA, and then you had like different kind of branches of the kind of main, and obviously these people. But essentially, what we're talking about here is a government who's letting people away with murder, basically, and basically, as you say, it's been proved. So, do you think that the Good Friday Agreement suits the government?
Well, just to on that point you made about the real IRA was a later iteration of armed republicanism. So
Right.
there was the provisional IRA was the main combatant during the conflict called the Troubles. They called a ceasefire and disarmed. And the real IRA was a splinter group, Republican dissident group, which then continued what they would call the so-called armed struggle. So not the same
Right.
organization, not a wing of the organization, but a separate iteration of it.
Mhm.
Does the Good Friday Agreement suit the British government? I mean, I think the Good Friday Agreement suits everybody. It brought peace to Northern Ireland, thank God. It stopped the murder.
Mhm.
Um, and if there's one thing I'm kind of proud of my generation of people from the island is that we decided it was over, that we weren't going to take this anymore. We demonstrated for peace. It was our generation voted for peace. Um, so that's a very important thing that happened, because peace can only ever happen when the communities caught up in it decide it's over.
No, and I mean, obviously, it's horrifying to watch some of the stuff that you do see, and we only see, like, as you say, clips, and as you say, I've been brought up a Celtic fan, and you think you know wee bits and bobs, but even like what you were saying about the real IRA there, it's we don't know the kind of background and that how much actually went into it, Neil.
Northern Ireland's politics is the result of 700 years of politics, 700 years of conflict, and um, bloodshed and colonization and hatred and sectarianism. And so I don't blame anyone on the mainland for not understanding it, because it's very, very complicated. But yeah, the other thing about the Good Friday Agreement is Northern Ireland was bled white. I mean, it was just like we were bled white. I mean, like when I was a kid, when I was a young man, like when I was at university, and when I met just out of university, got my first job as a journalist, mass machine gunnings in bars was a regular occurrence. Just a bunch of guys or women and young folk would be in a bar drinking, and some lunatics would come in with machine guns and open up a gun with machine guns. I remember just down the road from my flat in Belfast, there was a mass murder at a betting shop, Sean Graham's betting shop on the Ormer Road, where loyalist gunmen just walked in and opened fire. So, like, this stuff was now monstrous. Like, Northern Ireland was eating itself alive. Like, when I was 18, I remember, like, it was 14 days in May in 1988 when Northern Ireland nearly tipped into civil war. It was like you had a series of events where, first of all, you had an IRA unit on Gibraltar who were shot dead by the SAS. And then, at the funeral of some of those IRA folk, there was a loyalist terrorist called Michael Stone who attacked the funeral with guns and grenades.
Seen that, aye,
And then at the
seen that, Neil.
funeral of some of the people who were killed by Michael Stone, two corporals infamously were in an unmarked car. Undercover corporals were in an unmarked car. They were spotted by members of the IRA who thought this was going to be another attack on a Republican funeral, and they were taken out stripped naked and lynched in the streets of Belfast in an act of savagery that I couldn't get my head around. I was doing
Mhm.
my A levels at the time, and I was up in Belfast at a peace conference for young kids, for young folk who were part of basically the broad peace movement that was happening. So
Aye.
I was in Belfast that day of that Saturday where those corporals were murdered, and we had been all these young idealistic kids were talking about peace and unity, and then driving home, I'm listening to the radio, and they're lynching soldiers in the street.
It's crazy. No, I mean, obviously, it's hard to even imagine as you say, we only see what we get to see, and we only see a narrative that the media want to feed you. Do you know what I mean? So we don't even get to see the kind of real, as you say, like the kind of stuff that you've looked into. So we'll move on, Neil, to the kind of the Iraq stuff, and obviously kind of the expose of the kind of weapons of mass destruction. So how did that come about? How was that? That was a huge story for you as well.
Yes, well, so I was investigations editor at the Sunday Herald at that point, and clearly Iraq was, uh, after 9/11, Iraq was in the spotlight. And, you know, like, it was clear that Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction, because we had actually sold Iraq what was called dual-use equipment back in the early 80s. This is material that you could use in from memory, something like a hospital heart machine that could also be used in nuclear industries, right? So we had sold dual use. And I mean, there had also been sales of dangerous chemicals and potential biological pathogens that were sold. So any WMD that went into Iraq primarily came from the West, right? And then after Gulf War I, we sent in weapons inspectors who destroyed it all. I mean, so not only did we have the receipts because we flogged the stuff, but we'd also sent weapons inspectors in to destroy it, and then it came back on the agenda. So, because of intelligence contacts within British intelligence, I was able to turn my attention to interrogating what is the truth behind the claims about WMD, and built up a portfolio of intelligence contacts as well in America. So. Yeah, I mean, it soon became apparent that this was a simple, it's not simple, I mean, a very sophisticated disinformation campaign by both the British and American governments. So, for example, you had one operation, one intelligence operation, which it's quite clever, but quite subtle as well. So, for example, British intelligence could plant a story in the media of a foreign nation. So let's say Asian or African or Latin American country X, okay? And the story planted in there is that, I don't know, maybe Saddam has been looking for weapons of mass destruction, maybe Iraqi agents have been, something which connects Iraq to weapons of mass destruction, okay? Now, that material can then, but it's been planted by British intelligence. Okay? It's planted in the foreign press, but that can then be picked up and then used to say, oh, there's reports that Iraq is trying to get weapons of mass destruction in country X or country Y.
Right, aye.
So, I mean, it's like me saying, I heard that Sean Toll's doing, no, it's like me telling my next door neighbor, I heard Sean Toll's doing X, and then my next door neighbor goes around telling everyone Sean Toll's doing X. Well, I just started the lie in the first place. It's just a Chinese whisper. But it's done by British diplomats and, intelligence operatives. So,
was it as kind of insidious as that, Neil? Was it like was that the kind of lie? Because obviously it's extremely hard for anybody. I've read into wee bits. I know a wee bit more about the kind of Iraq stuff than I do about the kind of troubles and stuff. But it's quite hard for people to believe that people would just create a lie to start a war. So can you kind of say what background you think why that would even start? Why the lie would even come out?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a political agenda within the Bush government, within George W. Bush's government, that was pretty aggressively, in terms of geopolitics, pretty aggressive and expansionist. Before Bush got into power, there was a document written called Rebuilding America's Defenses, which was basically written by all the hawks that surrounded Bush. And it talked about a kind of, talked about what it called a Pax Americana, which is basically subduing perceived enemies of the United States in the West, like Iraq, for instance. But like Iraq. So there was a political and ideological and a framework and philosophy which pinned the notion of taking out Saddam. I think after 9/11, look, and I'll say this understandably, 9/11 was a terrible, awful thing that happened to the United States, and it was like any country which suffers an appalling terror attack, it overreacted, and it was right to take out Al Qaeda. It was right to take out Bin Laden, and to go into Afghanistan. The operation in Afghanistan should have been taking out Bin Laden and taking out Al Qaeda. And damn good if the Taliban fell as a result of that. We should never have occupied Afghanistan in the way we did. We should have helped the nation rebuild. But Iraq got put in the targets fair and square there because it was a recent enemy of the United States, and it was, I think, the American political and military leadership at that time thought, look, we're not going to piss around here. We perceive a risk, and we're gonna take out that risk, and we have to flim flam up intelligence to do it. We'll flim flam it up, and they flim flammed it up. There was an organization, within the kind of Pentagon CIA structure called the Office of Special Plans. It was highly politicized. It was so a lot of this was about cherry picking. So if you think about that British operation, which was planting information overseas, which could then be called on to prove that there was WMD, similar stuff would happen in both American and British intelligence networks, which were providing documents for government. So, they cherry pick information which pointed exclusively towards WMD, but there's a shitload of information that doesn't point towards WMD. In fact, which points towards quite the reverse, that WMD's gone, but that all never gets published.
Aye.
So, in other words, I've got a file on Sean Toll. Some of it's like, oh, he's a good guy. He's done this, that, and the other. And then there's all the bad things about you. All I publish is the bad thing.
Aye.
You know what I mean?
Aye.
So it's a complete restructuring of reality, fundamentally. And so, for example, I mean, you could just, a should will become a will. I mean, do you remember that infamous front page that ran in so many of the British tabloids that Britain was 45 minutes from destruction? That was a front page that happened, that Saddam could hit British targets. I believe maybe Cyprus was mentioned or something within 45 minutes. Well, first of all, that was ages old intelligence from way back, before Gulf War I, when Saddam did have weapons that we had given him. And, so it's old intelligence. It's also been changed from could to will. So back in the 80s, Saddam could have hit us, becomes now in 2003, Saddam will hit us. That's a big difference, right?
Totally. I know. It's playing with words and kind of playing with
Timelines.
obviously old intelligence. No, definitely, Neil. And so see the kind of, when you look into like Saddam Hussein obviously was a bad person. There's no
He was a monster,
doubt in that.
and Saddam was a monster. It did the world a favor that he went. If Britain and America had said, we would like to ask our people, do they want us to take Saddam out because he's a murdering rapist who treats his people like slaves? That's a completely different question.
Yes.
Now, I would have had a completely different approach to that. I don't believe, I'm a pacifist by nature. Is that the way that his regime change the right thing to do? Well, I mean, that's, again, a completely different debate. If you want a regime change, for example, North Korea, I think it's a legitimate discussion to say that North Korea is a terrible regime. It would be lovely if we could get rid of it so the North Korean people were free. But making up lies, to lie to your people, because the fundamental problem here for me is that the lies that were told about Iraq started the rot within British and American democracy that has led us to places like Trump. It broke trust, because we know the people marched on the streets of Britain, and there are 1 million people saying no to the invasion of Iraq because 1 million of them were aware it was either lies or they just didn't want it to happen. Then we went to war based on lies that there was WMD in Iraq. Those WMD were never found. Iraq was turned into an inferno. And two things happened. One, many people in Britain thought, if they lied to me over that, what won't they lie to me about? And two, it began the radicalization of many people overseas who hate us, and gave them an excuse to come and do terrible things in our country, like blow up a London bus, blow up a London tube. We were handing, it became a recruit. I mean, everyone was saying this at the time, we had former soldiers and ex-spies and ex-government ministers all warning this is going to backfire on our nations, and it has backfired. We've destroyed, we've rather wounded our democracy so bad that we've got people like Trump and the characters that we have now emerging in Britain, and we've created a maelstrom in countries like Iraq, which eventually led to the rise of Islamic State. It wouldn't have happened. No. Islamic State would not have happened without the war in Iraq. So the idea that even Tony Blair's nonsense about making the world a better place, a safer place, it didn't work. It made the world a more dangerous place. It made British democracy weaker. And I'd like British democracy to be strong and the world to be safe. and I'm happy to see bad guys punished if we do it honestly.
Aye.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and bad regimes fall. Great. I'd love to see, like Russia. I'd love to see it fall tomorrow. I'd like to
Mm-hmm.
see Putin in the dock. I would love to see the British people help to make Russia free and help to make Ukraine free, because monstrous regimes need to go. But we can't lie about it, because if we lie
Aye.
to our own, if our governments lie to our, if our governments lie to us as citizens, then they're just pouring acid all over our system, and that's what we're living with now, I think.
No, I totally agree with you. And I actually watched Putin and Tucker Carlson, the interview with they two, and I don't like Putin or Tucker Carlson really, to be honest. But what did strike me is the Nord Stream pipeline. That doesn't sit right with me that Russia would have done that. So I do believe that was the CIA and stuff like that. So again, we're doing stuff and putting out lies again. In my eyes, Neil, you might have a different opinion. In my eyes, again, you're giving somebody like Putin a voice.
Frankly, I would say that Tucker Carlson is giving Putin. Tucker Carlson is scum. To go to Moscow and present that butcher a propaganda coup like that, it disgusts me. It debases journalism. He's a traitor to America, and America should treat him as such. And anyone in Britain who behaves like that, I would have no problem with using treason laws against them.
I know it's so I it was a obviously it was just they gave Putin a kind of it was just a kind of a history lesson that he was allowed to kind of make himself look good. But again, it's just one of these things. So I'll take you your own kind of career, Neil. Like so your own kind of like working with working with the Herald, and obviously being the kind of the editor. What was that like? I mean, that's a huge job.
So I joined as part of the launch team for the Sunday Herald in 1999. And then I was their home affairs editor, which means I kind of looked after crime, prisons, policing, intelligence, all that kind of stuff. It's very funny, actually. Some people in the PR industry back in those days um, didn't really understand what a home affairs editor was, and I used to get sent all these like cushions and cookery books. Thought it was like I did stuff for like
Aye.
home. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Then I became their investigations editor, and I was their head of news. And then I was the deputy editor, and then I was the editor of the Sunday Herald for about 4 years, from about 2015. Yeah, it was a great job. It's a hard job. Like got great fun. I'm a writer at large now for the Herald. I'm freelance. I left about 4 years ago or so, and went freelance. I wanted to kind of return to. I make documentaries. Maybe you want to
Hmm.
talk about some of the documentaries I've made about
Definitely.
neo Nazis and stuff. But
Hmm.
so I wanted to, and I write. As you know, I write books, but I also write novels. So I wanted to return. It's pretty non-stop being an editor. It's exhausting. You don't see a lot of your family, and you don't have a lot of time for yourself. And so I did 4 years as editor. Then I went freelance, and I'm writer at large now, which means I write uh, opinion columns and long form journalism,
Hmm.
and also criticism. So I do like lots of book reviews and theatre and
Aye.
film and stuff like that. So it's a much it's a kind of different thing I'm doing now, but it also allowed me to return to uh, documentaries and novel writing and so forth, because uh, I suppose I'm happiest when I'm writing a novel.
Is that your passion then, Neil? Like when you're actually kind of getting lost in the wee kind of fantasy of creating your own story?
Yeah, it's very mindful. I mean, like you make up a world and you make up characters and you just disappear inside that world for as long as you're able to, as long as the time allows you. And yeah, I love writing.
So can we expect a Game of Thrones for you soon then?
No, well, it's not, that isn't my type of book. I did like the show, but I don't really read a lot of fantasy and stuff like that. My first novel was about Northern Ireland. It was about two kids, two young children who, we've had a lot of quite recently as well. We've had experiences of children who kill. So I was exploring the effect on two very traumatized disturbed kids in Northern Ireland who don't. It's not political violence. It's just violence that they enact on their kind of
Aye.
peers around them and so forth. And just exploring. I'm interested in exploring. Why people go down certain paths, why people
Mm-hmm.
turn to crime, why people find themselves in a violent world. My second, so I've written 3 books. My first book was a non-fiction book about Iraq. First novel was about Northern Ireland, which I just told you about.
Mm-hmm.
That's called All the Little Guns Go Bang Bang Bang. All the little guns went bang bang bang. Sorry, I forgot the tense of my own novel there. So, and then the next book was called The Wolf Trial, and it was based on a real. I mean, I'm still fascinated by this case. It was based on a real case in Germany in the 1500s, where a man was tried as a werewolf. A man called Peter Stumpf was put on trial. It's a real trial that happened in about 1520, 30, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was put on trial as a werewolf. Now, when you read the trial manuscript, with a modern mind, you immediately go, oh, they've caught a serial killer and they didn't understand what a serial killer was.
Right.
They couldn't get the grip. So why would this person have literally torn people to bits in the woods? Why was he killing children and women?
Aye.
And they were like, so the only thing they could the only way to rationalize it was he must be a werewolf, must be possessed by the devil. So they put him on trial, and I fictionalized that as because I have a pretty strong antipathy for religion, and it allowed me to work out the kind of the way religion. It was a sort of it was about science versus religion as well. It's this book because it sort of took the case of Peter Stumpf, the werewolf serial killer, and then he was on trial, and it became a sort of courtroom drama where he's been prosecuted by the church but defended by a guy who was very rational and science led by science. And it kind of allowed me to also explore the idea of mob mentality that we see on Twitter today, and no, well, not just on Twitter. We see it in the streets now, don't we? Post-COVID, I mean, during COVID, and in America during the Capitol riots, we could see what mobs do in our countries now. So yeah, my next book is. I'll maybe talk about it later. I'll see how I feel. But I'm sort of, if you talk about something that isn't ready, then you're fearful of ballsing it up. I'm putting the mockers on it, as it were. So I'm scared if I talk about this book, it'll just fall to pieces. So
No. I actually just wrote a book myself. It was just about it's called Authenticity and Chaos. And it's basically about just like how you can't be yourself in prison.
Yes.
So it was just one of the what you were saying about earlier about like how people go down roads and how honestly I've done a lot of thinking about that as well, Neil. I honestly just always take it back to poverty. Poverty is the key in all it. Do you know what I mean?
I think one of the smartest guys in Scotland today is a mate of mine called Niven Rennie. Used to be chief super in Glasgow, chief superintendent, murder squad and all that. Then he became head of the violence reduction unit, which, as people famously know, reduced the level of violent crime in this country by, a hell of a margin. And Niven's view, which I completely concur with, is that fundamentally most crime is a public health issue. That if we treat crime the way we treat drugs, if you think crime is if you treat it at source, why has that person got that addiction, or why is that person violent? Well, it's probably to do with trauma when they were violence in the home, poverty, addiction in the home, experiences of care, not being loved enough, being neglected, and those kind of things hand themselves on, don't they? The famous poem by Philip Larkin called "This Be the Verse." It's got the famous line that begins, "They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do." Forgive me for swearing if you're not allowed to swear on your show.
No, you can swear away.
But there's a line in that says, "Man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as quickly as you can and don't have any kids yourself." Because basically what he said, which I don't agree with, because one of the best things in my life is being a dad. I love being a father is the greatest achievement of my life. But what he is saying there is that we hand on intergenerational trauma. Really, it kind of is the subtext to that poem, and I absolutely buy into that. Look, when I wrote a column recently talking about carrying a knife when I was a teenager, because I grew up in a really, really brutal housing estate where, I mean, I told you I was nearly murdered in Belfast as a, when I was about 18 by a loyalist mob. I was nearly murdered when I was 14 as well, just not far from my own front door. Like a bunch of, this is like 1984. It was like skinheads on the streets and all that kind of shit.
Aye.
And, a bunch of skinheads, they were about 18. I know it was about half a dozen more of them. And there was me and four of us. So me and three of my mates. Oh, we're 14. We're boys. Like, these are men.
Aye. Mm-hmm.
They just.
Oh, so these are actual men that
They're
were
like,
the
they're
skinhead?
18, 19, 20, because a couple of them were
Mm-hmm.
subsequently prosecuted. And like, they meant to kill us that night. Like, I mean, the reason I think I lived was basically one guy had me by the hair and he was beating my head off the ground and then off a fence for ages. There happened to be an off-duty cop in the house where I was having my head beat off the
Aye.
fence. He came out with his personal protection weapon and didn't
God.
fire it, but showed it, waved it around.
Aye.
These bastards fled, but not until one came back and kicked me like so hard in the head that was me. I was like out, gone. I lost
Aye.
teeth, like it was really bad, really bad. So like not long after that, I bought a knife and I carried it because that's what, it's like, that's why I get so weary sometimes of talking to middle class Scotland and middle class anywhere. They don't understand that what the experience is like for all young people, but young men in particularly, because young men kill young men, and I didn't want to get killed, so I regret, of course, carrying a knife, but I did, and I pulled it a couple of times. I never used it, but I pulled it to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
I regret that, and the moment I got out of that estate, when I told you I went to a very good school, the moment I got straight A's in my A levels, I was out, gone. I was never back, and I never ever thought of touching a knife again. I never wanted to be violent, but you had to learn to protect yourself in that community I grew up in. You had to learn to fight, or you get trampled on. And by the time you got to 14, 15, it wasn't a matter of if you could fight or protect yourself. That didn't mean you're going to survive, because when 18-year-old, 19, 20-year-old men are going to try and kick a 14-year-old and his mates to death.
I know.
Well, the game's a different game, right?
Definitely.
So,
and I think we've had we've had Karen McCluskey on the show, and we've had James Dockett, who I believe James is the best trauma speaker in Scotland. I think he's absolutely amazing at it. But both them work for the Violence Reduction Unit with Niven. I think Karen actually created it with Niven, but they're really on the trauma, the same kind of level as you, in the same wavelength, Neil. But it's really interesting to even hear yourself, and I'm really glad that you're open and honest about that you carried a knife, because there's so many people out there that don't, and they tend to forget their own upbringing, if you know what I mean, like how it was as a kid, and how it is at school, and
for sure,
what it's like to grow up in environments create.
I have to be honest. I still am working class inside my head because I lived that life. I grew up. That's my foundational experience. I cannot in any way sit here and pretend that I'm middle class anymore. My world has changed. My income, my social economics have changed for me. So will not be one of these phony pricks either, who pretend for something they're not. I am now middle class, like it or lump it, whether I like it or not. My socioeconomic position makes me middle class.
Of course.
But I know what it means to be working class. I know what it means to be poor, and I know what it means to live in a violent community. So I've carried that with me my whole life, and I've tried to make that inform everything I've done professionally. So when I'm writing about crime, I've got an awareness. I've got an awareness. I know that no middle class person who writes about crime will ever have, because they haven't experienced what I've experienced, or seen what I've seen, or lived what I've done.
I think that's why your writing's so powerful, Neil, to be honest. I think that's why you've got such a good following, and people like to read your stuff. It's you can see the difference. And obviously I spent a long time in prison, and I was inside for a crime I didn't commit, and that's a different story. But I was there, and I was involved in a fight that went wrong, and it's hard to look back at that, and as a 19-year-old kid, and just to kind of the amount of damage that it done, it caused so much damage and trauma for a lot of people. And then when you go into prison, you're in an environment that you really need to grow up fast. You really need to make 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 a life of something that you really shouldn't be able to make. It's horrible. You need to flip all your values. You need to flip your whole moral system. Your moral compass is skewed. Um, and I just don't know how society expects these guys just to come out and that's that change. Do you know what I mean? Like that's flip in a day, and you're like, why are you expecting? Why are you expecting any different here?
Well, it can't happen, can it? You can't just incarcerate someone with no real fundamental rehabilitation and expect them to come out and you know, be Mother Teresa. It's downright stupid. I'm within my school, I wasn't a fluke because there's lots of working class kids who went to that school because they passed exams and they went on to be doctors, engineers, writers, actors, all sorts of stuff. But within
Mhm.
my estate, I was quite a fluke because a lot of my friends who I grew up with in my estate ended up dead and ended up in clink. And my brain got me out of there. And luck, frankly.
Aye.
Luck. I mean, I'll
Mhm.
still say luck. You know, if I had come from, there's plenty of bright kids out there, kids who were brighter than me, who couldn't pass exams because, you know, the chaos at home was too much, the addiction, the alcoholism, the upheaval of homelessness or whatever, and they didn't pass exams. Now, what would have befallen me if a bright young kid who's starved of education but is still smart,
Mhm.
exposed to crime? What might I have become? A criminal? A very
No,
dangerous criminal?
no. It's that is how easy it is, Neil, I think papers like I mean, they're dying a death. They're dying a death, which they quite rightly should be. But your Daily Record and the Sun and these kind of papers that don't really look into why crimes committed, they just like to sensationalise it and probably add to the kind of they actually add to the kind of fundamental problem that we have now in Glasgow and stuff like that, and even Scotland, even Britain. Do you know what I mean? Just Britain and the drugs that are coming in now. I don't honestly think we're ready for the fentanyl stuff that's coming over here
Yes,
just now. And I don't know if you know about that, but
yes, I do.
that it's going to be. I dread it so much. I honestly dread it so much, and you're starting to find it in Valium, and you're starting to
Yeah,
find it in. It's just horrible, and I think that the problem again is always poverty. Neil, I used to say it when I was in prison. I used to say, show me the people here for the middle class areas. Show me them. I've done 15 years, and I don't ever
aye,
see any of them ever.
of course.
They're not here. Do you know what I mean? So the problem lies within the society.
No, 100%. Could I just pick up on the point you made there about newspapers? Because I just want to say that I understand what your dislike of certain newspapers in Britain, and I dislike a lot of the editorial line that are taken by newspapers. But I would never want any newspaper to close because I know the reporters in those papers, and those reporters
Aye.
aren't bad. Most of
Mhm.
the reporters who work for papers that you might find have discomfort with, and I also have political and social discomfort with, they're just earning a living, and I don't want to see anyone unemployed. What I would like to see is those papers, some papers, not necessarily the ones you named there, but certainly newspapers like the Sun and the Mail under different management, having different approaches to
Mhm.
their news. Um, yes, I think that Murdoch has caused untold damage in this country with his formation of fermenting culture wars and so on since kind of I was a little one. But the reporters who work in there are just trying to pay the bills. I know where they're coming from, and I know most of them. Most reporters who are working in papers that have a slant that you or I or many other folk might disagree with, they probably are of the same political bent and the same social bent as many of their critics. It's just they've got bills to
Mhm.
pay, and I understand the anger that some people feel, but my view would no paper should close. I think a healthy media ecosystem, which means newspapers, podcasts, magazines, broadcasters, books, a whole plethora all across the board. A healthy country has a healthy media system, and it doesn't have to all, it shouldn't all accord with me. You need a right wing commentators
Yes,
Much
no, I agree with you. I agree
you
with
need a
you.
liberal commentator, and you need like I'm an atheist. It's important that there's religious people having their say. It's equally
Yes.
important
Mhm.
atheists have their say. It's important a Tory has their say. Equally important a supporter of Scottish independence has their say. A good
Mhm.
ecosystem, media ecosystem, allows all these voices to flourish, and it does so honestly. So, or what I would like to see, I would like to see many papers which I find problematic under different management not close.
Mhm. No, I totally understand that, and I've been on a journey, Neil, of acceptance, and I'm no like fully there, and I've got a lot of stuff to accept, but I have worked. I've done a lot of work spiritually. I know you're obviously a atheist, but I believe that I don't believe in any religion, but I believe there's something. So I've done a kind of lot of work spiritually. I've accepted a lot of stuff that probably back 10 years ago, I would have said I would never be able to accept. I've
Mhm.
spoke to like Paddy Hill and stuff like that, and Paddy
I know
that'll say
Paddy
to me
well.
like, "I don't know." He'll go, "I don't know how you date, Sean." He says, "I don't know how," and I say, "Look, I'm trying to just see like these people are in a job. They're the crown. Their job is to convict you. It's no to look at evidence that my legal team missed."
I mean, I don't know your case, Sean, but with Paddy, it was a pure fit
Aye.
up. I mean, you can have
Oh, shocking.
like just as you can have. I don't believe in defund the police or anything like that. We need a good police
Mhm.
service. I've got
Of course.
friends who are
Aye.
in the police, and I respect good police officers. What I hate is bad
Mhm.
police officers. So you need police reform. So just like you need media reform to get
Of
bad
course.
eggs out, you need police reform. But with Paddy, and forgive me because I don't know your case really,
No,
Sean, I
no.
just know the broad brush. But with Paddy, it was a pure straight up stitch up. I mean, so they're
Totally.
bad cops. That was bad cops doing bad things, and people should have been brought into court for what happened to Paddy and others who experienced those kind of miscarriages of justice.
No, I'm obviously good friends with Joe Steele, and I know obviously Joe's been talking to you,
Yeah,
and Joe's one of the nicest people that you'd ever meet. He's got a heart of gold, and he's so traumatized for the situation, but he's dealt with it, and he's so resilient. And but what they actually done to him like was unbelievable. And as you say, it seems as if people don't get held accountable when people miscarriage of justices like Paddy's and Joe's happen. You would think that right, who done this? Like who done this? Who actually put
right, for sure.
this? Who didn't give justice for both sides here? Do you know what I mean? My case is different. My case isn't as clear cut as that. So I get why there's different things, but as you say, I think you need a healthy police system, a healthy judicial system, a healthy media. But I don't think we have that, Neil. That's only my opinion. I don't think we have that now.
And well, Sean, I don't think we've got anything that's healthy in Britain now, and I don't think we have had for a long time. I think our government in our UK government is rotten, literally. Like it's
Aye.
it's septic, it's toxic, it's 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 foul what's happened to the House of Commons and what goes on in government. Um, and listen, I'm not by any way means equating Holyrood and the Scottish government with what goes on in that lunatic asylum down there. It's not the same by any stretch of the imagination, but it ain't great up here either, right? I mean,
No.
there's no government that impresses me anywhere. There's no political party that impresses me. They're all failures. They're all full of liars. I don't really know anymore if there's anyone in politics. There's a couple of people I know. I mean, there's a couple of friends I have in a few political parties who I would believe that they went in with the right idea. Does the right
Aye.
idea survive with them now after decades of being in a party? I
Mhm.
don't think. How can you keep your moral integrity in a political party which asks you to suffocate your moral integrity and follow a party line and not be a free thinker? I think the
Yeah.
party system itself is absolutely toxic. I think the British democracy, in fact, all Western democracy, needs a version 2.0. We need to update it so it's much more
Aye.
participatory with ordinary folk like me and you really connected to our democracy. I'm a big advocate of citizens' assemblies, you know.
Aye.
I'm a big advocate of the kind of participatory democracy where you might have you could replace the House of Lords, for instance, with
Yes.
with a House of Citizens where folk like me and
Aye.
you by ballot 600,
Mhm.
1,000 office, spend a year in the House of Commons, and we act as the second legislature. and it means that all of us are potentially can play our role. Now, maybe that's a little
Mhm.
utopian, and it probably is utopian. But listen, I don't think there's anything wrong with sometimes espousing utopian ideas if it at least gets us talking, and maybe we don't achieve utopia, but we fix the shit that we're in.
Definitely. I think the way the political, there's so much division now, Neil. The whole thing I see, the whole political outlay just seems to be so divided. It's like, as you say, is like somebody like Donald Trump in power. I mean, I don't, it's just beyond me how he gets there. But anyway, then you've got Rishi Sunak who comes in. And so literally you're talking about two guys here that are some of the wealthiest people in the
Yeah.
world. And you're going, how can these people, 90% of the country's working class, how are these people connecting with anything that's going on in our countries? How can we, do you know what I mean? It's beyond me, Neil.
Well, as we said, the media has failed oftentimes to, hold the right to the same standards that the left is held to, because we have a media ecosystem which is tilted far too strongly to the right. Um, so that is clearly unhelpful. Um, and that's where we are. I think we've never really had enough. I think also, I mean, let's be honest. Britain doesn't understand its own place in the world anymore. We're a
No.
post-imperial nation, and we don't know what we are. We were an empire. We're this now. What is this? What is this? I don't know what this country is anymore. Do you? We tried to make some sense for ourselves by getting into Europe, and it did make some sense. We were part of Europe. For my generation
Mhm,
and my children's generation, because my kids are in their 20s, were
mhm.
robbed of their European identity by Brexit. And I was robbed of my European identity because that's probably where I would identify most. I'm an Irishman, but I live in Britain, and
Aye.
I feel my European identity is very is not was is no, they haven't taken away from me. They've just kind of stole it from me, but I'm sure I'll hopefully get it back one day.
Aye.
We tried to make sense for ourselves through the European Union, and it did give us a sense of self. And then culture war extremist Tories decided to detonate that, and we are where we are now. In their attempt to make this great and amazing, make Britain great again, their version of Trumpism or MAGA nonsense, they've destroyed Britain. They thought they could make us
Definitely.
some kind of, you know, buccaneering Elizabethan state, ruling the seas and trade deals with, all across the world. Well, that hasn't happened. And it's shown that post empire, we're a kind of small little nation led by small little people. We're a Lilliput.
No, I couldn't agree more, Neil. And I think that'll probably take us on because obviously looking at some of your documentaries, the neo-Nazi stuff, and you've looked quite in depth at division. So it'd be quite interesting to hear you. What, where do you think we've went? Where do you think this division's came in? Where do you think it started? Do you know? Can you even look back at that?
Yeah, I think you think we can. I think there's a couple of totemic events which started this. I think there's the financial crash, which really proved that the state wasn't here to help me and you anymore. It was here to help big financial institutions. And that broke any kind of social contract between politics and the people because we went to the
Yes.
wall through austerity in order to save
Mhm.
banks. So that's one thing. I think 9/11 and the way it was handled set up set the scene for the grotesque racism that we see in the world. And I would see that racism on both sides. There's utterly abhorrent behavior, um, you know, by white
I
racists.
hate
There's
racism as
utter
well. Aye.
abhorrent behavior by Islamic fundamentalists. Um, I think the Iraq War fractured trust, broke trust. So we started to then completely doubt what our politicians were saying. Um, the rise of social media um, splintered any sort of cohesion. And I think this is also important. The way culture is splintered now, that nothing brings us
Yes.
together as people. So, and I'm not saying, look, let's go back to the days of three channels on the TV when we had 25 million of us watched Eric and Ernie at Christmas, right? I'm not saying that.
Aye.
But there is no social cohesion anymore. And I think social media is part of the crowbar that's pulled that apart. So it's just set us against each other. We don't we don't trust our governments because they'll throw us to the wolves over for bankers. We don't believe our governments because they lied over Iraq. We've set up interracial animosity, um, and well, also the absolute mishandling of immigration is
Aye.
is
Aye.
hugely dangerous. We've never had an intelligent conversation about migration, about how do you be how can, because I believe in a country um being I believe a country must help the most vulnerable people. We must help the most vulnerable people in our society. So our
I agree.
neglected children, our old folks, our drug addicts. We need to have decent prisons because of prisons and mental hospitals are where
Yeah.
our most vulnerable people are. And if we can help, and if places like that can do good. But I also
Mhm.
believe that we need to help folk from overseas. You know,
Definitely.
our doors should be open. If someone is fleeing genuine persecution, come in and here we'll help you. Here's a job, here's a home, here's a doctor. We'll get you on your feet, and hopefully you'll start paying taxes, become a functioning member of society. You'll enrich our society, and we'll become a much more happy, content place. We've handled immigration in a really bad way. I'm not for open door. I mean, you can't have open door immigration. That's
No,
madness,
of
because
course.
then
No.
it just
Mhm.
it's crazy. But the Tories have just treated immigrant like allowed the immigration list to grow and grow and grow, and they've done nothing to actually deal with asylum processes. So you have people put in hotels, which become a magnet for the far right. I mean, I know Nazis. I've spent years
Aye.
following Nazis. I know how they think. One of the most salient things that a Nazi ever said to me was down in Cambridgeshire once when he was putting on his DM boots, his oxbloods, and going out for the night. He said to me, Neil, you see what? See people like you. See you liberal lefties. See if you let all the immigrants in, I'll get my way, and then this country will be what I want it to be. They are happy to watch the Tory party make a disaster out of immigration
Aye.
instead of handling this in a fair, kind, and sophisticated way where we have a sane migration policy which genuinely welcomes and helps refugees, processes the asylum claims that need to be processed, and also doesn't mean that we've got this. Like, no one believes in an open door. No one believes in that.
No, of course.
So
No.
we've allowed all these things to fester and rot, and it's become so toxic, so flammable. I mean, like we've had the far right patriotic alternative protesting outside immigration asylum hotels. I hate the word asylum seeker. I remember having a war with the
No, no.
Home Office back in the early 2000s when the word this is under Blair, when the word asylum seeker started to be replaced to instead of refugee. And I would just keep writing stories which mentioned refugees, and the Home Office rang me up and said,
Definitely.
stop saying refugees, it's asylum seeker. And I'm like, you don't tell me what to say. My editor,
Aye.
I'll write it, and if my editor thinks it's okay to publish, he'll publish it. Nothing to do with you,
Aye.
Blair, and your Blair lackey. So go beat it. Um, yeah, I mean that in itself speaks volumes. That manipulation of language is always very highly toxic, I think. Um, yeah, it's a tragic mess. But we're so, and now we even are divided over issues of gender. For pity's sake,
I know.
like
I know.
you got this tiny, tiny minority of trans people in the country, and sure, I understand that there's a section of feminism who are uncomfortable with this because they're worried about their rights.
Of course.
That's cool, and that needs to be taken into consideration. But the hatred towards
Yeah.
trans people in this country now by
I
far
know.
right mobs, by Christian fundamentalists, it's just grotesque. I mean, a nation which makes its turns a tiny minority of what not 0.1 people percent of us are trans or
I
something,
know.
turns them into the nation's whipping boy. It's like it's so gross, you know, and it's just a tragic mess that we've got ourselves into, and but it's happening all across the West. We're not alone in this. I think it
I
just
know.
happens to be accelerating in Britain because we're so unmoored from our sense of identity. Um, whereas many European nations, I think, have a firmer identity because they're part of the EU that gives them some sort of ballast. But the United States is going the same way. I mean, we're much more like the United States than we are European countries because look, and I love America. I've worked in America. I've got family in there because some of my closest friends are American, and it scares the daylights out of me what's happening to America. I mean, like, I know I sound like a panic merchant. But like, how does that democracy survive? Well, what happens if Trump gets elected?
I know,
People will riot in the street.
I know.
Like you've got really intelligent, big brains in Harvard and Yale, professors of history and politics who are not now scared to say, "Are we heading for Civil War Mark II?" They're not scared to say that now.
No,
Like, I
no.
mean, I
Aye.
literally pray to God that this I'm being like an hysterical panic merchant over that because listen, for for whatever we might think about America, if American democracy falls or the America bails on NATO as Trump has threatened, we're in trouble. Deep shit.
No, I think so. I think even when I watched Putin, I think he kinda made it clear that he was quite happy to stand there and watch what's happening. That was kinda the way I got to him was, "We'll fight you on that border all day long, but I'm watching what's happening there, and yous are killing yourself here." So I think Putin is that's a tactical thing that he's pulled back. I think he's just sitting on that border
Yeah,
and hoping that we destroy
and he's
ourselves.
used. I mean, he's got a. He uses his intelligence services to destabilize us through Russian interference in our elections. It's a thing. It
Mhm.
happens. We've got plenty of Putin's useful idiots in Britain and America and across countries, all across Europe, particularly nations like Hungary, which is run by one of Putin's useful idiots, that bigot and wannabe demagogue Viktor Orban. Um, so Putin is happy to destabilize us, and we're destabilizing ourselves. We're doing the job for him. But I genuinely, the thing that scares me most at all now is the fall of America, the fall of American democracy. Because if it
I
falls, there'll
know.
be a ripple effect across Western democracies and other democracies across the rest of the world, like Japan and Australia and Latin America, and the democracies that are in Asia and Africa. It will be seen as a red flag to wannabe dictators to start tearing their democracies apart. And if Trump bails on NATO, listen, if that would mean Europe would stand alone, right, against Russia. And what happens
Do you
then?
think he would do it, Neil?
What? Trump bail on NATO?
Do you think
He
aye,
said it.
think he'll
He
do it?
said it. What Trump does,
I know, no, I heard
yes,
him
he
say it.
does. We learned that the last time when Trump says it, he does it. Might not do it
Mhm.
successfully, but he'll try and do it. Trump doesn't lie. That's the
Aye.
thing. Trump lies to save his own arse. But when he says, I will do this, I will be a monster to immigrants, he'll be a monster to immigrants. I'll build a wall. Well, he didn't pull it off, but he tried to, right? Um,
Of
you know,
course.
um, when he says Putin, is a great guy, yeah, he'll go and fucking kiss Putin's arse. So what Trump
Mhm.
does, he says, and he said that he'll throw us to the lions. He said that he would tell Putin, do what you want to them. And Putin hears
Mhm.
that. And if we don't help Ukraine beat that bastard, Putin, then nations like the Baltic states and Poland are going to be in the firing line. And if they're in the firing line, listen, I mean, have we got forgotten history so much that we don't forget how world wars start? And
No, I know,
it's not going to be
definitely.
me and you
Mhm.
fighting that war because
Mhm. I know.
we're not young enough anymore. But it'll be my
Mm.
son-in-laws or my
Mhm.
grandsons
Aye,
or my granddaughters or my daughters
I know.
because in this day and age women will be called up. Men will, as we see in Ukraine, men will die much more on the front line, but women are in the firing line too, and women are often the victims of war in terrible ways that men aren't when it comes to sexual violence and
I know.
the enduring bombing at home. I don't want to see any of this. And maybe again, I'm quite happy to be accused of being an hysterical panic monger if it means that maybe the conversation has had that,
Mhm.
frankly, and I know this is not what everyone wants to hear from someone who's perceived as a left wing liberal writer, but I believe that Europe has to rearm. I do. Seriously, rearm. We need to rearm, and we need to do what Denmark did. Denmark give all its ammunition to Zelensky. It
Mhm.
was an act of real heroism by the Danish government, and they should be celebrated around the world. They've basically emptied their munition stocks and given it to Kiev.
Mhm.
God bless them. More people need to do it because Ukraine is the battlefield for the 21st century between democracy and tyranny. And none of the useful idiots that kind of stalk the landscape in Britain and particularly Scotland are going to convince me otherwise. In fact, I detest their voices now. I mean, some of these people I might have, because I was against the Iraq War, people automatically think somehow that I wouldn't want to stand absolutely behind Ukraine. I am like passionate about my support for Ukraine and my respect
Mhm.
and of the courage of the Ukrainian people and my desire to see Putin fall and hopefully
Mhm.
die in a prison after he's tried for war crimes in The Hague because he's a monster, a modern Hitler.
I totally agree. I agree with everything you're saying, Neil. Right? And obviously, I studied politics myself, right? And I just, do you know that the unfortunate thing now is Putin is a terrible man, right? In what he does at his country, but see the people that are running our country. See like Biden and they they're not equally as terrible, but I don't I think they're terrible human beings as well. I don't actually rate anybody the new that's on the political scene. I don't think there's anybody that stands out that I go, do you know what? I think he's got a great voice, or I think he's got a great voice. Do you know? There's nobody. I can't see anybody's. So I think Putin probably, unfortunately, is probably the most clever out them all just now. And I think we could be kind of falling for his traps.
Well, I think two things that I think I would disagree with you. I would never put any Western politician on the same bracket as Putin because that's like saying that a Western politician in the 30s was somehow like Hitler. There's no comparison. So respectfully disagree with you um, very much on that. But however, that said, I'm not inspired by any of these people. You know, I don't think Biden is a bad guy. I think Biden is a well-intentioned centrist liberal-ish in the American form of liberal. Um, that
Mhm.
doesn't make him a good politician, nor does it make him a monster, in my view. But I don't think any country in the West has the right man or woman leading our nations at this time. I think
Mhm.
we need people of a different stripe, um, courageous, intelligent, modern people who see what's happening in the world now, who see that the game is changing. Like the game is changing
Mhm.
as we talk. This is the we are. History doesn't never repeats itself fully, but it echoes. And this is very much like the 20s. When the game is
Definitely.
changing in the 1920s, the rise of Mussolini, the rise of the Nazi Party,
Mhm.
crisis in the Western democracies because of poverty and hunger and political dissatisfaction, extremism and anti democratic voices being raised in the West. Because, and I say this as someone who would probably literally die for democracy, I would. It's the one
Mhm.
thing that stands between me and tyranny. Um, but, but these but we are killing our democracy. We're destroying. We're like we see. There's terrible findings that you see. Global studies of young people, Gen Z and millennials across the Western world. Huge amounts of them have turned on democracy. Huge amounts of them will say,
Mhm.
"Well, if it needs a strong man to get it done, that's fine." Now,
I
first of
know.
all, that it horrifies me, and then I pause and I think, why? Why are people the same age as my girls? My girls who are 20 in their mid-20s.
Mhm.
Why are they thinking like this? Well, because democracy's failed them. Democracy didn't fail me.
Yeah.
Democracy meant
Mhm.
I could go to a good school. I was able to
Mhm.
go as a working class boy with not a penny in my pocket to some of the best
Mhm.
universities in this country for free. I was paid to go to
Mhm.
university. I got a full grant. I was the last of the full grant kids. And I was never poor, so I could educate myself uh, at the states um, through the state. So democracy was good for me.
Mhm.
Then when I became a young man, yes, the Tories were in power, and yes, I came out of university in the teeth of recession. But that was part of the democracy's ebb and flow. Sometimes you got a Tory, sometimes you got a recession.
Yeah.
Democracy will look after you. The health service will work. All that kind of stuff. It doesn't happen anymore for
Mhm.
young people. They can't get a house. They can't see their doctor. They're scared to have kids. Um, their jobs are precarious. Their bosses treat them like shit. Like so, democracy.
Aye.
If you're young, I don't agree with them, but I get why some of them are thinking like that, and it scares the hell out of me. And that's not just kids, in overseas foreign democracies. This is kids in our democracy, in in
Definitely.
Britain. I mean, in fact. don't actually even want to say this, and I'll keep this really vague, but there's a young man I know, mid-20s, and I had a conversation with him not so long ago, and he just despises democracy. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I was frightened, because I thought, if there's enough of you, then you'll vote people like me out. You'll vote against democracy. I don't want to grow old in an authoritarian dictatorship. In fact, I don't think that's ever going to
No.
happen to Britain. I think we'll just be a broken, limping along democracy. We'll, just becoming a sort of ever decreasing nothing. You couldn't get a tyranny in Britain. I mean, we've had our democracy. So, but maybe I never subscribed to that. It could never happen here. You always have to protect democracy. But what I do worry is that people will fall out of love and passion for democracy so much that our politicians have make it so unlovable and so not deserving of passion, that it'll just disintegrate around us. And the one thing I really don't want to do, and is enter late life in a country that is in some sort of war. Like
No.
if Britain was in a war economy, if Europe was at war, if America bailed on us under a Trump presidency, isolationist America, fortress Europe, Russian threats. It's not like the old age I ever anticipated for myself. I imagined, reading books in the garden with my grandkids. But what is
No.
actually happening to us it's happening under our feet as we talk, and we're so bloody obsessed with our phones and the bullshit detritus of life. These minor culture wars that mean nothing. That we've
I
taken our
know.
eye off the big issues, and the big issue is the survival of democracy for me. That, to me, there is no bigger issue. There's
No.
no bigger issue.
No, I agree with you. I agree with s I'm 38, so I didn't experience I was kinda obviously, I went to prison as well, young, Neil, I went 19, but
Aye.
the you get guys like Andrew Tate, right, who
Oh,
he's an absolute arsehole, right, but you get guys like Andrew Tate who are exceptionally articulate and who are able to feed into probably like the 20-year-old boy and kinda manipulate, and use social media
mhm.
to a degree where, young people go, "Do you know what? Well, see if the politicians aren't gonna help me and I'm not getting helped half the state, I'm gonna try and validate myself elsewhere." So, these people articulate, come across flashy, this, it appeals to a young person because a young person growing up and going, "I've no got this, I've no got that, and the state of this, and I don't believe anything they say." You start trying to validate yourself out
I
with,
get.
um, ins instead of being like, maybe you looked Jeremy Corbyn was the last hope for me, Neil. That was that I thought Jeremy Corbyn would have been great. I don't know how you think about that, but when he didn't get in and it turned the way it did, I kinda turned my back a wee bit on democracy as well, and I looked at it and I just go, How do we get it back?"
We have to. Well, yeah, okay, it's easier said than done. Some guy in Glasgow talking to another guy in Glasgow about how this is done. In fact, there's so much to talk about what you said there, because I want to talk about Tate, who is a. Oh, I mean, yeah, well, maybe calm down. How do we get back democracy? Listen, I mean, we have to take it back. Democracy's ours. It's not theirs. It's not Rishi Sunak's or Keir Starmer or Nicola Sturgeon's or Humza Yousaf's or Donald Trump or Emmanuel Macron or Olaf Scholz. It's not theirs. It's ours.
No,
So we have to take it back with
I
our
know.
bare hands. And I don't mean in any way. I am a pacifist and I'm anti. There's nothing wrong with this forceful protest, but I am against any act of violence given where I came from. So I'm not talking about
Mhm.
anything that's in any way violent. But we need to take this back. We need to stop. We've kind of been gutted as communities. Like we were talking earlier, we're all disconnected. There's nothing between us anymore. And
Totally.
unless we organize and get together, old school, like the trade union movement in the 1900s, unless we organize from a grassroots up, from old ladies in schemes and lads running a food van, all of us, every one of us, from a
Mhm.
writer like me to you know the old lady next door to me, unless we care about this, we're done. So I mean,
No.
but I mean, like, I'm just one guy. I've got no political program, no political platform. I do believe in much more participatory democracy. I believe in citizen participation in things like citizens' assemblies and a House of Citizens as a potential second legislature. But I've said that's quite utopian thinking, and I think it's probably
Hmm.
thinking that's ahead of. And I don't mean this because, hey, I'm so clever, I'm ahead of my time. I don't mean that.
No, no, I know what you mean.
Slightly ahead of
Hmm.
my time. I think it will
Hmm.
come to fruition. I think
Hmm.
in maybe 20 years. Um, People might think, okay, participatory democracy, which is really citizen led, is the way to save democracy. But I kind of think we need to speed that up, because what else is going to save democracy? Well, I'll tell you what might save democracy: a fairer social economic contract between the people and the state.
Yes.
Tax the rich, tax the
Hmm.
shit out of the rich, and help the poor. Most of
Yes,
us,
I couldn't agree more.
most of us are, ordinary folk. We're not rich. I'm not rich. Right, I've
Hmm.
said to you, like, I've left the middle class, I've left the working class behind. I know that, um,
Hmm.
and I know that I've got the accoutrements of a middle class lifestyle, but I ain't rich. We're all a couple of paychecks away
Hmm.
from the gutter, right? So I'm
Aye.
not safe. I can't see my GP. I can't get the health service I want. Um,
Hmm.
the environment around me, and I live in a nice area of Glasgow. It's becoming run down. The schools are suffering. My kids are burdened with debt. My kids, middle class kids with good jobs, can't get on the housing ladder.
Hmm.
So we need a new social contract between the people and the state, and that
Hmm.
social contract has to be making sure that the vast majority of us can live functioning lives, which means a good job. We pay fair taxes. The rich get taxed hard, and our schools and roads and hospitals and police and prisons and all that shit works. I mean,
Hmm.
that's it. But we don't have that conversation.
I know.
There's very few countries having that conversation. The Scandies, the Danes and the Norwegians and the Finnish and the Swedes, they kind of had that conversation back in the 60s and 70s, created much more
Hmm.
egalitarian, social democratic societies. Christ, why did we not follow them? I know it's different for them now, because
I know.
now they're facing now their society has been is dealing with crisis around immigration, because you've got fundamentally white societies which are now being there's culture warriors trying to pull them apart over issues like
Hmm.
migration. But in terms of the social contract between um, the people and the state, when it comes to economics, they're much fairer societies. You pay a lot of tax, you get
Definitely.
good services, you get no
Hmm. Definitely.
it's much harder to fall through the cracks. And we know that. I can't remember what I think it's called, the Gini coefficient, Gini, the Gini coefficient. And I think that shows when you've got the larger the gap between the poor and the rich, the greater social discontent, the greater crime, the greater distrust of democracy, all that stuff.
Aye.
It's like, I
Hmm.
mean, so it's not rocket science, but it's really hard to work out in how a country like Britain we even start the conversation to build a fairer society. A fairer society will fix everything. I mean, it's what.
I know. It's I always say it. It's like your Andrew Tate's, and I know Elon Musk totally different from Andrew
Ugh,
Tate, but I'm talking about money wise.
another monster.
Um, I know it's you've got people with I don't even like I don't know why do you need that amount of money. Let's be honest, it's beyond me. I mean, I know I think you know Chris Dolan.
I know, Chris. Yeah.
Chris was on here and we were talking about like implement a maximum wage and why that can't even if you were to say, look, there's like £10 million, live half of £10 million, and I know inflation would happen and we would need to rework and rejig stuff, but why somebody's allowed to have £25 billion in their bank when the social problems we're facing and the division and the erosion of democracy is so high and people are allowed to have this amount of money is beyond me, Neil. So what would be your views on that kind of that these lives, the Andrew Tates and your Elon Musks and these people that have got these crazy amounts of money?
Well, first, from a purely human, personal view, I detest them. I detest Tate as a man, because I think my generation, so I'm early 50s, my generation started the change in masculinity. Back in the day, we were called new men, right? That meant when we had kids, we wanted to push the pram around, and we wanted our partners to be equal with us. We couldn't understand the sexism of our fathers and grandfathers, and we wanted to reject that, just as we wanted to reject the racism that we saw in apartheid South Africa, or just as we
Aye.
wanted to see peace in Northern Ireland, or just as we supported things like Rock Against Racism, or all those things that made my generation quite idealistic, that I love about Generation X. So for me, uh, it's been really important, I think, the journey that masculinity has gone on, because we do talk about toxic masculinity now, and sure as shit it exists, but masculinity has improved. It has improved. So many men are so different than their dads and their grandfathers, so different. Now, that doesn't mean that masculinity is in any way not in need of a lot of surgery. It is. I have used the word toxic masculinity myself for many, 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 many years. In fact, I was talking to a TV company about making a documentary about toxic masculinity not so long ago, because they know that I've written a lot about how men need to change and be better and embrace a more, frankly, be empathetic human beings. We were taught,
Yes.
my generation was the first generation that kind of went, you know what, I think it's all right if we cry. You know, I think it's okay if we show that we've got emotions, that we're not hard men all the time, that we're not strong all the time, that we can have mental health problems, that we can be weak. You know, you need a form of masculinity which can be both strong and embrace the fact that it's not strong all the time. And,
Vulnerability.
and also be empathetic and be loving. You know, like fatherhood should be defined as nurturing, not discipline or putting food on the table. A lot of that's changed, but you've got these toxic pricks like Tate Online, and I mean, they're grifters, right? All they are, just grifters, just chancers, just. I mean, he's a psychopath, clearly, because he obviously hates women and he wants to control and abuse women. All right, he's that, and he's a grifter for a lot of young fucking idiots out there. It's easy to part a fool with their money, and there's plenty of young men who are fools out there. They don't have any real. There's not a lot of. Well, let me go back to the word toxic masculinity, because I'm saying I've used that for a long time, and I've even talked about writing a book using that title and a documentary. I don't think that works as a word anymore. I think it should be ditched. I think we need to ditch that out of our lexicon, because what it is saying to young men, the young men you need to talk to, is that you're toxic, you stink, you're rotten. And if you say that to someone, it's like the Brexiteer argument. It's like when you just call. I mean, I hate Brexit, but when you just call a Brexiteer stupid, all you do is make that Brexiteer all the more Brexity, right? Same dichotomy that happens in Scotland over independence and the union. You know, I'm a soft independent supporter. I've got plenty of respect for folk who are unionist. Absolutely, completely legitimate.
Totally.
Why should they feel that? If I can feel this, they can feel that. But one of the problems is we start saying, "Oh, you're a stupid cybernat. You're just a yoon. You're a quisling. You're betraying Scotland." That's bullshit. You're never going to change anyone's mind. It just makes you feel good. There's a famous quote by, oh God, what's his name? Norman Mailer, the famous American novelist. During the run-up post 9/11, before the invasion of Iraq, he had this brilliant saying when he said that America reminds him of Adonis. You know, Adonis, the legendary god, beautiful man who ever walked the earth, right? And he said, the problem is America, it reminds me of, he's like this Adonis, but he has to sniff his armpits every 5 minutes to make sure he doesn't stink, because he's got no self-belief. And I think that's what happens with people, like when you're an absolute screaming Remainer, screaming Brexiter, screaming nationalist, Scottish nationalist, screaming British nationalist in Scotland. If you're one of these people, you've got so little self-belief, you're full of self-doubt. And I think that's one of the problems with masculinity at the moment. A lot of men don't have they're just filled with self-doubt. They've got no self-belief. And by simply saying you're toxic, you just reinforce their stupid behavior, their misogyny, their that football hooliganism bullshit, you know? So I think a much more intelligent conversation about what it means to be a real man, where you can be strong and courageous, but you can also be nurturing and empathetic. And there's nothing wrong with having a feminine side, because we all got a feminine side, just as all women have a masculine side to some extent. You know, women can run the gamut of behavior just as men can run. I fundamentally think there's very, very, very little difference between the sexes, that we're all the same. And a lot of this is socialized the way that we see men and women. Someone who I interviewed last year, I think, was a lady called Dr. Gwen Adshead, and she was the chief psychiatrist in Broadmoor for the Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where Brady and all these folk were treated. You know, and she said she specialized in female violent crime. And one of the things she said to me is that that fundamentally, if women were raised the same as men, in other words, taught not to cry, taught to be strong, taught to hide their feelings, taught sometimes to be brutal, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
brutalized by their dads, by their friends, engaging in violence all the time. If women were brought up like that, they'd be as criminal as
Mm-hmm.
men. They'd be doing the same murders.
Definitely. I think the you need to get vulnerable to have some sort of growth. If you won't grow, and I know you're no spiritual, Neil, but I think it's just, I think it's similar. When you grow as a person, that can be spiritual. That can be somebody like yourself, spiritual when you grow. But you need to be vulnerable. You need to speak about what's affecting you. What is mental health? What is anxiety? And these are all. It's mad that people like your Andrew Tates and that will say there's no such thing as mental health when really it's like primal, like anxiety and stuff is a primal function of the brain. Do you know what I mean?
John,
That's used.
any psychiatrist will tell you it's only the mad who tell you they're not mad. So what's Andrew Tate doing there when he says there's no such thing as mental health problems? He's kind of telling you he's mentally ill. And he is mentally ill. Anyone who lacks that level of empathy, anyone who thinks of women in the way that he thinks of women, I mean, he's barely
No,
human, right? I mean, in fact,
aye,
I think he's surrendered his humanity. A terrible thing to say about another human being, but I think in a way he has surrendered his humanity because if you don't have empathy, is our key evolutionary driver. It's not being able to pick up a rock and kill the other monkey in the tree before we evolved into humans. That's not what makes us human. Is that we learned how to cooperate, tell stories,
aye,
talk to each other,
mm-hmm,
be a group, protect each other. It's a famous evolutionary anthropologist who, when asked what's the first sign of civilization you came across? And she said it was the broken femur of a Neanderthal that had healed. Because that broken femur of the Neanderthal that healed meant that Neanderthal's friends and family supported it when they could have died. 50,000 years ago,
mm-hmm.
you broke your leg, you'd imagine you died. No,
Yeah,
this
you're
Neanderthal
done.
didn't. This
Mhm,
Neanderthal was looked after.
mhm.
That's the first sign of civilization, an empathy for another human being. Um,
No, it's a basic principle, and obviously we're coming up kind of near the end here, Neil. So it is a basic principle. I think that just empathy, compassion, these are things that need to be put into probably the political arena as well. On both sides, do you know what I mean? On both sides, where I've got to go, I don't, I don't hate Rishi Sunak. I don't know him, but I dislike his politics. I dislike the way he lives. I dislike probably him as a person, but he's allowed his point of view, and I think as you spoke about earlier, we need healthier debate. We we don't the hatred in that's no working. The it's dividing us more and allowing certain people who would never have had a platform to become presidents in stuffy countries, which is very, very dangerous. And I think that, as you say before, it's we need to build democracy back and probably bring people like myself who's on the periphery going, I
yeah,
don't even want democracy. You know what I mean? Like bring it back.
absolutely should absolutely you would be the prime person to engage with about democracy because you're a smart guy and you like big ideas and you want to talk and you want to explore things and you've got an open mind. But clearly democracy has let you down and you've got doubts about it now. You're the prime person for like someone like me and you to sit down and talk like this, right? And maybe bring
Mhm,
you in to some sort of movement that might say, how do we fix democracy? How do we make democracy work that the Seans of this world feel cool about it and the Needles of this world aren't scared it's going to fall to bits anymore?
mhm,
But on the issue of vulnerability, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm a big fan of Ernest Hemingway, and he wrote that famous sentence, being strong at the broken places. And I think
mhm,
you have to suffer the slings and arrows of life to become a better person. I don't think anyone who hasn't been sort of forged in fire a wee bit can be truly empathetic with another human or really have even started on a journey to make themselves the person that they could be. And where I might not
mhm,
be religious and where I might identify as an atheist, I'm kind of an atheist in search of spirituality, if you know what I mean. I do
mhm,
wish that I wish that uh, I wish that I could have some sense of spirit. In fact, I can get spirituality in my life. I can get spirituality from
Human
nature,
spirit.
from
Hmm.
you know, the beauty of the world.
I think just basic human spirit. I think just basic human spirit for an atheist. I
Yeah.
think that's just human. The spirit that's in you doesn't need to be from a different realm or a different guy, whatever. Do you know what I mean? It can just be the spirit of a human being. Do you know what I mean?
We're the greatest
Hmm.
thing, until we find something on another planet that's not us and is get greater than us. We're the greatest thing that, this universe has ever created, and we're pretty fucking amazing. And,
Hmm.
I think it's such a terrible tragedy. So many of us are monsters, but equally the monstrosity of us is fascinating too, because what is this thing that we are that can be like, because I know that there was an historical Jesus, and I know he preached in, Judea way back then,
Hmm.
and I think what that guy was talking about is bang on the money for me. He's an old school lefty,
True.
and I think he's a
I do.
hippie lefty, and I'm pretty much a hippie lefty, and I like the stuff that the historical Jesus was talking about. I just don't believe all the kind of oogly boogly ghost stuff, right? I just don't buy into that because
Right.
I don't believe in ghosts and I don't believe in big sky fairies. So, but that's my prejudice, I suppose.
Hmm.
But I do feel that you can have a spirituality based on just being a human, based on the
Oh,
fact that we are
definitely.
what we are, amazing creatures, and the world in which we inhabit is astonishing. Like, it's so beautiful to look at. Just looking up at the night sky
Hmm.
should leave anyone breathless. Why do you need a god when you've got that above your head? Like, you know what I mean? Um,
Aye.
but yeah, I'm an atheist in search of spirituality, I suppose.
No, honestly, I don't think as it. A lot of people struggle, and I've had friends that go into AA and CA and stuff like that, and they've struggled with that when they talk about like the spirituality. And I do believe that there's I just believe in positive and negative energy. To be honest, Neil, I think when you look at Tesla's work, Einstein and stuff, I think it's pretty apparent that this is just energy. Do you know what I mean? And so I believe in positive and
Uh-huh.
negative energy, and I think that it can be manipulated by yourself in a certain way. But that's just my
But
opinion.
I just make one wee point about religion, just so I don't leave people in any doubt about where I stand. I've said for a long time that I hated all religions now, and that's because I came up in a society in which people pretended they were Christians but did the most awful things. And I never met a Christian who walked the walk as well as talked the talk until I came to Scotland, and I met some, right, and actually they're among
Hmm.
the people that I respect and like most of my life. Like, there's a
Definitely.
former Kirk moderator of my acquaintance who absolutely changed my mind about what religion could do, because he just so passionately wanted to live the teachings of Jesus Christ. And
Hmm.
whereas I don't believe in all the, sky fairy stuff, I do believe in the philosophy of Jesus. And to hear that
Hmm.
man talk like that, I was massively impressed. One of the most, and I thought to myself, change your attitude, Neil. Don't You can't blanket hate religion because of your upbringing. It's not right. It's right to hold the liars and the hypocrites to account, but there's plenty of good Christians and,
Hmm.
you know, folk who believe in Judaism and Islam and Buddhists and Hindus. There's plenty of those good people out there. So I think it was John Milton Keynes who said, when the facts change, I change my opinion. What do you do, sir? I change my opinion. I'm not going to stick to my opinion if I'm been proved wrong. And I started to see more and more people from a Christian background, um, primarily a Christian background, do really good works, but
Hmm.
also folk in other the faiths in Scotland too. So I have mellowed. But I hope people will excuse me if I was slightly prejudicial towards organized religion because of my experience as a child, because all I saw was religion causing murder and men, nearly always men, who pretended that they were, holy, ramping up bloodshed and horror.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, I have mellowed in my approach to organized religion.
No, obviously we're just going to be finishing up soon, but I think when you look at the kind of just the whole way that religion was built, Constantine, I think Constantine stole Jesus Christ's work, and I think he knew this is a way to kind of assemble the masses and bring them together to basically control. It was a control technique for me. I don't think any man should be able to write and or choose what holy. And Constantine wasn't never claimed to be the son of Christ or anything, so I don't understand why. But anyway, that's a whole new story. Um, But listen, Neil, I'm going to I'm going to give you the last wee kind of word. Just anything that we've kind of missed out, anything that you've got coming up, any projects, any documentaries, anything you've got coming up. But it's been absolutely amazing having you on and having your views. So, is there anything you would like to speak about?
No, Sean, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've covered a lot of stuff. I suppose the only thing we didn't touch on much, and given that we both live in Scotland, was the whole political situation here. But geez, where's that going to go? We're kind of just stuck in never-ending limbo land, aren't we? But no, I mean, it's been a delight talking to you. Pleasure.
No, thanks, Neil, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Brilliant.